Welcome, friends. Welcome to another edition of Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul. I'm your host, Dr. David, the Cutting Edge Doc, and here on Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul, we do in-depth interviews with individuals that are doing cutting edge work in the areas of healing, spirituality, and social transformation. And I am very excited about today's show. I think this show addresses all three of those areas: healing, spirituality, and social transformation. And I've been looking forward to this show and having this in-depth conversation with my guest for a couple of months now. My special guest today is Dr. Benjamin Perkus, who's a licensed psychologist in the state of New York in the USA. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for Dr. Perkus. He followed his intuition and his love for helping people and his love for essential oils to develop a unique approach that he calls Aroma-Freedom technique that is not only helping a lot of people to enjoy their life a lot more and reduce unnecessary suffering, but he's also has a gift for codifying information and organizing material, and he's developed a way in a short period of time to teach lay people how to do the technique. And from my experience of being exposed to Dr. Perkus's work, I think that a layperson can do a lot with what he has brought into the world, and I think a qualified professional in the healing arts could integrate this and even do more with it. So I'm very excited about today's show and introducing the world to Dr. Benjamin Perkus and to Aroma-Freedom technique. So I'm going to bring Dr. Perkus into the conversation now. Dr. Perkus, welcome to Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul.
Well, thank you, David. I'm really happy to be here. And ever since we started our conversation a couple of months ago, I really appreciated all the understanding that you have brought of neuroscience and spirituality and personal development. And you were able to really see what I was doing and even helped me to see the broader context that it lies within. So I'm really excited to be here today as well.
You're welcome, and we'll have a chance to get into that. So as you know, this podcast is a little, and I'm also doing videos now, so it's also going to be on YouTube, but my interviews are a little bit different from most of the interviews that are out there. It's kind of a throwback to a time in the past where things were a little slower and there was an opportunity to really do in-depth interviews. So this is this show is kind of in honor to the in-depth interview, kind of resurrecting like the Phoenix in-depth interview. And so we have plenty of time in the beginning for my guests to purposefully tell their story in such a way that the viewer or the listener will have a real sense of who you are in your journey, so that later on in the interview, when we talk specifically about Aroma-Freedom technique, there'll be a very powerful context for listening so that the conversation can be as powerful as possible. So I'm going to turn the show over to you for a while and just give you a chance to tell your story in that kind of a way that brings us up to speed.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so let's see. I guess I'll go all the way back to when I was growing up. My mother was into yoga, and my parents were kind of progressive, and so I was exposed to body mind types of things really for a long time in my life. And I got my first degree in philosophy, so I have a kind of a broad context. And then when I moved into the psychology realm after my undergraduate, I knew that I did not want to be boxed in by one particular approach, because I knew that psychology was kind of a splintered field, and there are a lot of people claiming that theirs was the only way to do psychology, and I never really was interested in that. So my doctorate was from Duquesne University, which actually is an existential, phenomenological, humanistic program, which is really, and this is really where I learned to listen really well and just kind of let what's happening with a person to emerge without imposing my theoretical foundation on it. I did my internship at University of Ottawa in Canada. And again, this was because they have a very broad approach. And I studied really all the major schools of therapy, everything from psychodynamic, existential, cognitive behavioral, humanistic, Gestalt. We had emotional focus. We had Jungian. So I really had a broad understanding of all the major schools of therapy. And so then finally, when I got into my own practice, I was bringing everything that I had learned, but it's funny, after all that training, it took me about 2 weeks to realize that I needed some more tools, that just talking with people about their issues from the past and about what they were, where they wanted to go in life, I just felt that I needed some tools that would really dig in more on the brain level, more on the physiology, to help them make those shifts. So I got my early training in EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. This was back in the late 90s. And that technique really made a big impact on me, because it's really a way of identifying these negative memories and the thoughts and the feelings in the body, what we call the memory complex. And instead of just talking about, or instead of just forcing a person to just kind of confront their fears or confront their phobias and just kind of like try to muscle through it, this process actually took a brain-based approach and helped people to process those memories. EMDR uses eye movements or bilateral stimulation. And although it's much faster than traditional methods, and I loved it for that reason, and I used it for a number of years, a lot of people also felt like it was kind of grueling, that it was, people would feel very tired afterwards and need a lot of integration processing time. So it was a great advance, and I really have a great deal of respect for Francine Shapiro, who invented that process. But I kept looking and learning. I learned about EFT, so this is the tapping. A lot of people are familiar with this, tapping on acupuncture meridian points to clear away the emotional charge that is kind of trapped, you could say, in the meridians. And that's a very fast technique, and people are able to shift very quickly into more relaxed states. And a lot of the other things, I got into neurofeedback when I learned how we can actually program our brains directly to create different states of awareness, whether it's more focus or more relaxation. I had a neurofeedback machine for a while, so I used that. So I've always been a seeker and a learner, and I would take whatever I liked from that, integrate it, and then kept moving on. And then it was about almost 16 years ago, my wife and I were exposed to essential oils. We started using Young Living essential oils, and we just used them in our home, in our daily life, and they made a profound impact for people. So we would teach classes on how people could, maintain wellness with essential oils, body, mind, and spirit type things. And that just kind of grew. We became deeply involved with using the oils, but I felt like there was kind of a split in me, because I had my psychology practice, which I loved, and I also had our essential oils business, which I loved helping people, to use the oils to impact their lives, but I didn't quite figure out how to get them together. I knew that the oils were relaxing or they could be energizing, but I wasn't really sure how could I actually use it in my clinical practice, and there were some techniques out there that used oils where people would be laying on a massage table and for a few hours smelling different oils and having emotional releases. I never really resonated with that approach, mostly because it didn't really fit into my clinical model, where people were coming in for a little less than an hour sitting across from me, and I just didn't work for me to do it a different way. And I learned kinesiology, muscle testing, and I was very impressed with different systems and ways that people could just very quickly and succinctly go and identify, for instance, where the person's energy got blocked, and release an emotion from that. But the trouble with kinesiology was it wasn't something people could do on themselves, and it wasn't something that they could teach to others easily. So my first breakthrough came when I started experimenting with using the essential oils, you could say, in the place of the eye movements with EMDR. So instead of having people using eye movements or bilateral stimulation, I would have them identifying the negative memory, traumatic memory with an emotional charge, and I would have them smell specific essential oils. There was a Young Living blend called Trauma Life, which was specifically designed for trauma, and people would smell the oil, and they would notice that it just seemed like the memory started to dissolve or break apart, and very gently, and much more gently than I had seen with EMDR. So I had that in my toolbox, and I used that with people who had traumatic things, either recently or even long ago, that they were struggling with. And I actually went and I taught that overseas. I taught that was my kind of my one trick pony that I had, because I knew it worked so well for these traumatic memories. But it was about a year and a half ago that I really felt this inspiration that I wanted to find something that could work for everybody and for all types of issues, because that's a specific population, say post-traumatic stress. But I know that all of us, a lot of our suffering comes from the disappointments, the hurts, the frustrations, the things that everyday people experience, big or little traumas. I thought, well, if this works so well on those traumatic memories, it should be able to do something for all these things. So it was last spring that I had just finished a lecture tour, and I just felt like I had enough information. I just had to put it together. So I told my wife, I said, that book that I've been wanting to write for 20 years, because I've always known that there was kind of a book in me. In fact, one of my favorite times in my life was when I was in my mother's attic writing my dissertation. And that may seem strange to some people, but I just really enjoyed it. I loved synthesizing ideas and writing about them. So I told her, I gave myself a month. I said I would work better under a deadline. I have 30 days, I'm going to write this book. So I was going to the library every day, and I was writing this book. And at this time, there was no specific technique. There was just all the observations that I'd had clinically over the years, understanding how the negative thoughts arise from these negative experiences, understanding how the oils seem to shift the state of consciousness instantly, how it works in the brain with the amygdala. So I knew all of that, but I didn't have the order down. And one of the breakthroughs had come when I was reading a book on the inner voice. And the inner voice is something that people notice when they meditate. They notice that there's this inner dialogue that seems to always be occurring. And so I said, well, let me start there. And so I decided that the first part of the technique would be to set a goal for something that you want, and then to listen. What does the negative voice say that tells you this can't happen? And I found that this is a very rich source of information. So instead of me using a theory to try to figure out where someone's block is coming from, I'm just asking them. I say, well, what does the negative voice say? Sure enough, people will tell you. If someone says what they want, you say, well, what does the negative voice say that tells you it can't happen? There's going to be an answer. And then I realized that, well, so let's work on this. Let's take the negative voice. Well, how do you feel? Where do you feel it in your body? And then once you have that, then you're tapping into this memory complex. So then I say, drift back to an earlier time when you felt the same way. And more often than not, about 90% of the time, people will go back to a specific memory, or kind of like a movie of a whole bunch of times. So now they have the memory complex. And then I say, okay, now we're going to smell the essential oils. So I decided on a blend of frankincense, because frankincense stimulates the pineal gland, and actually has some brain receptors that are specific to incensyl acetate, one of the components in frankincense, that relax. Lavender works on the opioid receptors, and vanilla oil also, there's some research on that for affecting serotonin and dopamine. So the vanilla oil is in our Young Living Stress Away. So I say combine frankincense, lavender, and stress away oil, breathe the oils in, and then watch what happens. And then we just notice. And what happens is that negative memory that a person goes back to, it starts to break apart, starts to dissolve. So I explain that. I say that's what it's dissolving, the memory complex. And we can get into a little bit of there are some specific brain reasons why this happens, which we can maybe talk about in a minute. But so I realized that if I put the steps in order, it was like turning a key in the mind, and something seemed to be happening every time. And it was very profound and very gentle, powerful, and quick. So I noticed it worked for myself. I started testing it out on my family, my friends, my clients, and everyone was having the same result, where people, they would notice within, about a 10 or 20 minute session that where they had felt hopeless or helpless about something, about reaching their goal, all of a sudden they were feeling empowered, like they can do it. And we realized that we were dissolving those memory complexes that were holding them back. So at this point, I only had 15 days left in my challenge that I'd given myself to write the book in 15 days. So I set the goal that I'm going to write my book in 15 days. And sure enough, my negative voice was there. It was saying that's not possible. That's too much pressure. No one can do that. There was a feeling of overwhelm. And I took myself back to a memory. I don't even know what it is now because it's kind of dissolved. But and I had the memory. I smelled my essential oils. Sure enough, after about 10 seconds, this thought popped into my head. I realized, oh, 150-page book, that's just 10 pages a day for 15 days. How hard is that? So I emerged from that knowing I write 10 pages a day for 15 days and my goal can be complete. And my inner resistance was gone. There was just nothing. I didn't even know that I had inner resistance. But once I did the technique, I realized that I had been holding back thinking it wasn't possible. So once that was gone, every day I would write my 10 pages. And then something kind of happened after 4 or 5 days. I could see the whole book in front of me. And it just kind of, then I realized that I was actually writing a book about a technique. So as strange as it sounds, I kind of came to this. I was like the last to know that this was actually what I was creating. And, I think it was a partnership with Spirit, that something was wanted to come through. And all of my training over the years, all the little techniques I had learned, I realized I had encountered all of them for a reason. And it was kind of like this broad gathering of information. And then it all kind of synthesized in this process. And then what surprised me, I thought I would write the book and, every author hopes that, they'll sell 1 million copies and everything. Well, what happened to me was a little different. I started doing trainings. People were asking me to go online and to teach their group, maybe 10 or 15 or 20 people. And I would take everyone through this process. They would have their oils and I would lead them through this process. And people were just having these profound experiences. So, I was as surprised as anyone how fast it would work and how consistently it worked. But it seemed like every time we got where we needed to go. So we actually, from that process, we created a certification program, and now people can be certified Aroma-Freedom technique practitioners, and we have instructors now. So all this just in the last year has really blossomed because I found something that is so simple and so duplicatable that everyday people are really achieving wonderful things with it. So now at this point, I'm just pleased to be able to share it with the world and really empower everyone to reach their dreams by just releasing those blocks.
Thank you so much. I have a lot of questions that are popping about the work, but before we go there, is it all right if I ask you a few questions about your own journey?
Sure.
So obviously you are being guided by Spirit in this process. How early in your life did you have a conscious relationship with the infinite?
In a way, it feels like I never didn't have one. I wasn't brought up in any strict religious tradition or anything. My father's Jewish. My mother was just broadly speaking Christian. And we went to the Unitarian Church when I lived in Oneonta. So just very broad. And like I said, she was getting into yoga and meditation. So these things just kind of seemed natural to me. And, I never even really questioned, people say, well, is there an afterlife? Is there God? Is there spirit? Like, to me, that was like a non-question because it seemed so obvious that this is, we're spiritual beings having this human experience. So
okay.
There wasn't really like one specific moment, like a near-death experience or something where all of a sudden my eyes open. It's more, of course, as with everyone, as I grew and developed, I would have different experiences of realizing, more and more of a connection.
Have you had any formal, in this lifetime, have you had any formal spiritual teachers?
I would count my, there were 2 people that I would consider spiritual teachers. One was the person who headed the yoga institute that my mother belonged to. And she would train us in breathing and body work and some with meditation. And then I had a philosophy professor who had actually gone through all of Western philosophy and then started getting into Zen Buddhism and started meditating and had an awakening when he was able to connect, but he was able to connect it in a very articulate way. So my philosophical training was really a spiritual training, but it involved really understanding basic attitudes and viewpoints, and he used a different method for how to dissolve them. But so I would say both my teachers were fairly Western. They were not really religious, but more coming from a meditation/inquiry perspective.
I understand. Now, your decision to close down your private practice, you had a lot invested in your career and you were married. What was that like for you to make that decision and get alignment with your family on that? What was that journey like for you?
Yeah, well, it was interesting because I had always been in private practice. I always knew I wanted private practice, so I had set one up very early in my career. And as it turned out, I did well, and I enjoyed it, and my clients loved it. I will say that I was always looking to learn something, and I wasn't the type of therapist that just wanted people to be coming in week after week for years. That really wasn't, I didn't feel I was really serving people that way. So I was always interested in helping people to get what they needed and to move on. So actually my first shift came, I had shifted my practice to a video-based practice. This is actually before the book came out. We were already traveling, and so I shifted, and the laws, these days you can do telemedicine. So I was doing some video-based sessions and things like that. But it kind of surprised me. I found myself doing all these trainings and teachings with my Aroma-Freedom technique, and I just felt like I was helping more people and reaching more people, and not just because there's more people on a call than one, but because those people themselves were starting to reach people. And when I'm seeing a client, I'm only helping one person at a time, and then they may or may not help anybody beyond that. So we actually moved out to Utah for the year because I realized most of my work was online. So we decided to move. But I do remember this moment when I was driving. I was driving the U-Haul. My wife was driving the van a day ahead of me, and I was driving the U-Haul, and it kind of something hit me. I realized I don't think I'm going to have a practice anymore, and I noticed that moment of fear, that kind of moment of, well, but this is how I've supported myself for 20 years. This is kind of my business model, what I'm used to. So I didn't really believe it at first. It was just kind of like this thought, like, has this shift really occurred? But over time, as my training business that I was building continued to grow, it just became clear to me that this was the new reality for me, was, teaching and training. And it's really a dream come true, because I always had wanted to be a lecturer, teacher, speaker. I always enjoyed that. And to be able to do that full time and to help people everywhere really was a dream come true for me and a fulfillment for me. So then the practice just kind of, it became clear that that was not really a good use of my time. So I still will do sessions here and there with people, but I'm always looking for ways to do a session with someone in a way that's going to reach more than just that person. So doing a demo where other people are watching is more beneficial, because then not only is that person being helped, but the people who are watching will learn as well, or doing a podcast or something like this.
Okay. Well, if it's all right with you, I'd like to segue into questions that pertain more directly to the work itself.
Sure.
Okay. So one of the things that I always like to know when I'm beginning to explore a new field or some new work is what it can do and what it cannot do. And also, and then also want to address the issue of that this work is going to be being used primarily by lay people, but it's also going to be incorporated into healthcare professionals' work. People who do different forms of energy work, body work, psychotherapy, different forms of spiritual counseling, coaching. And so I'd like you to address, as we begin the conversation, this part of the conversation, just to get some orientation. In your experience, what is this work good for? What can it do? What can't it do? What types of situations and people is it safe for lay people to work with? How do lay people know when they're getting in over their head? Let's just begin to create a
Sure.
safe and focused space for the work.
Okay, great. And if I forget any of those pieces of questions, just remind me. But so one of the first decisions to make when I created this was who was I going to train in it. And of course, writing a book, first of all, means anyone who reads the book could give it a try, and that's beyond my control. And I remembered that Francine Shapiro, when she created EMDR, she made a decision to only train mental health professionals. You had to be a licensed, or at least a student or license of psychology, social work, chiropractic, something like that. And I chose the opposite path because I also noted things like EFT and a lot of the things in the energy psychology and in the tapping world and so on. They go the opposite route and they train it as just a general lay technique, and anyone can learn it. So I made the decision that, from my experience, it looked, I wasn't seeing things happening in it that gave me any cause to believe that people needed to have a degree to be able to do it. So I chose to make the training available to anyone. And I encourage people who read the book to try it on themselves first. It can be a self-care tool, and to try it on their family and their friends, take them right through the process. And I always tell people, if you stay with the steps, you're going to be fine. The only time people get stuck is if they veer off the steps and they're not doing it as directed. Now, so it's something that anyone can do for themselves, family, friends. As far as incorporating it into therapy, absolutely. It's a great addition to any type of therapy because you can fold it right in. So if you're already a coach, let's say you're already working with people on setting goals, being accountable, this piece just plugs in to clear out the negative thoughts that are holding people back or from achieving those goals. And it's not, I say it right in the book and I repeat it in the trainings, this is not therapy per se. It doesn't really set up a therapeutic relationship. Every session is designed to stand on its own. I designed it so that in every session you're starting with your goal, and then you're going clearing out the negative thoughts, and you're ending with an affirmation statement and a power pose that is an expression of kind of what you shifted from the beginning to the end of that session. And so each session kind of stands on its own. This is why I say you don't have to be a therapist to do it. So the question of who is it not appropriate for, if let's say a layperson were to start doing a session with someone, how would they know that they were in over their head or that
Right.
They really shouldn't be doing this? I would say the things I say to look for, if a person is unable to focus long enough to be able to set a goal. In other words, they're just kind of all over the place and they can't even really start that point of, well, what do you want? And they, instead of answering that, they just keep talking or keep emoting, then they're not ready for the process, because you need to be able to kind of start with a clear enough head to be able to say, this is something that I want. So as far as referral to a professional therapist, that would be one key. Another would be if a person, they start the process and they just, their mind goes blank. They just can't hear any negative voice, or they feel numb. That's also a sign that it could mean that they're dissociating, could mean that they have shut down in some significant way, or maybe they have a brain injury and they just literally can't process these questions. So I would say that might be an example of where they're not really appropriate for the technique and they should be working with a professional in that area. But generally speaking, when someone gets into the process, even if there's strong emotion, if they stay with focusing on the image, instead of getting caught up in the emotion and stay focused on the image and breathing the oils into it, it does break it down and dissolve, and people come out the other side. And we have thousands of sessions now that we have in our database, and people just don't have the types of problems that you've heard of with other techniques that elicits a strong emotion and then people don't know what to do with it, because we understand very clearly where the emotion is coming from, what its purpose is, and how to handle it. And because the oils seem to have this direct effect on the limbic system and they're smelling the oils in this process, it stops things from getting out of control. It just doesn't seem to happen. So, I would say that those are the main things that come to mind of when a person might be not appropriate.
So even if someone has a very strong awareness of a very specific, overwhelming trauma, like a rape, or like something that happened in war, you would still feel okay about having that person go through and see what this could do for them working with the layperson.
I would, because I believe that the technique will take them, it'll peel back a layer, it'll take them through what they need to get through in that time. Now, if they find after doing that they just feel like they need more support, like they need to, they'll be clear for a day or two and then they're feeling like more stuff is coming, then that might be a time to say, okay, minimally, let's have you working with a therapist alongside me, because they need to know that there's someone there that they can turn to for emotional support or for to help them gain a perspective. So I feel like you don't really know until you do a session, and then once you've done one, nothing's bad's going to happen. But if you find that you feel like you need that that connection with someone that you would get with a therapist, or someone who has experience with PTSD. Like if a person, we don't treat diagnoses. So if a person has received a diagnosis, we're not going to say that we will treat PTSD, because that's not what we're doing. We're not, people are, the EFT practitioners are not trained to notice all the symptoms and take them through a structured approach with PTSD. So if you're looking for help with PTSD, you need to have a licensed professional. So if there's a diagnosis that you already have been given, then you're working with your licensed professional for that diagnosis. This is more to help shift you from where you are to the next step of where you want to go.
Have you considered compiling a list of qualified mental health care professionals who are also certified in Aroma-Freedom techniques, so that if people are in, if a layperson is in that situation, they have an easy flow point?
Yes, yep. That's a project that we're working on. We have, out of our certified practitioners, we have a handful that are also licensed professionals. So we are starting to compile that, and that should be a resource that we'll make available on our aromafreedom.com website, so that if someone, they have a diagnosis and they want a type of therapist that is able to use this process, then so that's in the works.
Well, that's exciting. Have you explored, at least in your own life or with your own clients or patients, have you explored using this protocol to enhance people who are already in really good shape in an area, like for peak performance?
Yeah, I have, let me think of a couple examples of that. I have one of my students, he is a musician, and he related an experience he had where he was trying to practice for a performance, and he found that he just wasn't practicing well. Like he kept messing up and it wasn't going well, and he was getting nervous about it. He took himself through an AFT process, and it went back to a time, I think when there was a recital and he had messed up, and he cleared that out and just had that emotional release. He said he had the best practice he's ever had since then, and he did beautifully afterwards. So he's starting to actually put together a program for performing artists to use this. I have a practitioner in Japan who is starting to work with professional golfers with this. So absolutely, there can be a place for peak performance with this.
How would you alter the protocol if you were, like, let's say you were working with a PGA golfer who already is golfing at a high level. They don't experience, any super pressing issue in their life, but they notice that they tend to be stuck in the middle of the pack in their results on the PGA Tour. And they have worked with their swing coach and everything, and their swing coach says, your swing is great, on the practice range, you're great. On the putting green, you're great. Your course management, you know what you're doing. But there's something between where you're at and where the top echelon of players are at, and we don't know what that is. If that person came to you, would you have a way of working with them in the context of this work, and how would you alter the protocol, if at all?
Yeah, well, absolutely. What's really neat with this process is that it's designed to basically enhance the growth process that we all experience every day. Every day we have the things that we want in life and that we are pursuing, whether it's our job, our relationship, our golf game, whatever it is. So no matter what the problem is, we always start with setting a goal. So in a case like that, it would just be a case of having a person set the goal. And the goal could be, for instance, if they've never hit below a 70 before, their goal would be to hit a 69 or a 65 or something like that. Or the goal, maybe there's a specific tournament coming up. Their goal is to win that tournament. So what's interesting, when you set a goal, this is what we learned from NLP and lots of other psychology sides of things. When you set a goal, it's going to trigger anything in you that disagrees with that. So we all have an identity that we have developed in our lives through growing up. So a golfer is going to develop an identity, an understanding of this is what I can hit, this is what I can't hit, here's where I do well, here's what I do poorly. And if they set a goal that challenges that identity, for instance, there may be some part of them that doesn't believe they could win that tournament. So let's say he sets the goal, and then he's going to listen in. And he's going to hear if there's something in him that says, you could never do that, or you're not as good as him, or whatever it is. We follow the same exact 12 steps, and we're clearing out whatever it is. The thing is that two different people setting the same goal will have completely different things that are blocking them. So in either case, you just start with the goal, and the goal could be very broad, or like a specific, let's say like winning the specific tournament. Or the goal could be about a specific part of their process, like if they're always slicing. The goal could be whatever the opposite of slicing is, to hit it. So it could be a very small thing or a big thing. And if there's something, we're going to capture if there's something in them that's blocking from that.
So the fact that the process is based on sort of a fundamental positive approach to the unfoldment of life, it lends itself to many different possible starting points without having to tweak the fundamental structure of the technique.
Absolutely. And I think it's because it's actually based on how the human mind actually works. So
right, that's what I meant. The fact that it's grounded in reality, that it's based on a theory of life and of how human beings function that is accurate. It's an accurate enough map.
Yeah.
That it doesn't have to be tweaked a lot.
Yep, absolutely. And for those of your listeners who have done any philosophy, even the whole structure of consciousness is what we call intentional, which means that nothing exists until we intend it in the world. And so this is whether it's seeing things in the world, or human beings are always creating projects. We're always projecting ourselves into a future, and that's how we get from here to there. If I wanted to become a doctor, I have to project that future and then move towards it. So because we're always doing that, we're just taking this process, and we start with, that's a given. You want something, you're going to be projecting towards something. And then we go through and find out what's blocking. Right.
And so that's exciting that it's an elegant enough model that it doesn't have to be, there are not a lot of like special case kind of corollaries. That's a good omen in terms of like, it's very parsimonious, it's very elegant. So that's a good indicator that you're onto something. Have you experimented with the pros and cons of trying to do the work in a group or quasi-group setting?
Yeah. So when I first created it, I imagined it as an individual or one-on-one. And then I did it in some small groups. And what's interesting in a small group or even a large group is that as the practitioner, I'll say, I may not know what everyone's goals in the group are. So everyone is writing down and they're kind of tracking their own process. So let's say there's 10 people or even 100 people in a group. I would be just guiding them, identify your goal, identifying how possible it feels, and then what's the negative thought. So it's more like a guided, almost a guided meditation. You could say I'm guiding people, instructing them what to look for in their own process. And what I find is it seems to work equally well in groups, small, large, or online groups especially. It works well because people can be in their own space and they can have that experience. I would say there's a percentage, hard to know how to put it, maybe 20% of the time, a person might need more specific guidance. Let's say they get lost somewhere in the process, or they can't go, they process more slowly than everyone else in the group. So there's going to be, say in a group, you could think of it like a standard curve where there's some people that are going to have this powerful life-changing experience. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to have a good experience, and there's going to be a few people that it just wasn't right for them. They just either couldn't open up in the group, even though you don't have to share what your process is in the group. You know, some people are distracted by others, or just emotionally, they just aren't able to connect it unless they're doing a one-on-one. So I would say most people do great in groups, but there's that percentage that need one-on-one.
I was imagining, as you were talking, I was imagining a large room where you're in front of the room and you're leading a large group through something like this. And then you have like 4 or 5 assistants that are in the room. And if someone's having a really hard time, they could raise their hand. And then there were these little side rooms off the main room. And they could go with an assistant, something like that. And another flash I had was I could see how this could be used very powerfully on a thematic basis. Like once people have once they're not beginners at the technique anymore, and you know they don't need any individual coaching, I could imagine, say, a group of 500 of us getting together virtually for a particular gathering, and we have an agreement before the gathering that this gathering is going to be focused on X, you know, world peace or vibrant health or financial abundance or something like that. And we have that agreement, and then we get the group synergy of all these hearts and minds and bodies together, and then you're guiding us through this. I just almost saw it as a powerful catalyst, not only for personal transformation, but also for cultural transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to respond to a couple of those things, we do have something called the Immersion Experience, where we will do an introduction to this process, and then we have everybody actually goes into pairs, and they give and receive the AFT process so that they really get comfortable. They get to receive a session and they get comfortable giving a session. And then we have instructors that go around and can answer questions and make sure everyone is getting the process correctly. And then we do a group clearing, same thing. If there's people who need individual help, they can. But this other piece about having themes, we do that a lot. We do that in the certification program, and at other times I'll lead a webinar on a specific topic, like maybe around Valentine's Day, I'll do one on love. And so we're talking about the experiencing love or being in a harmonious relationship or something like that. So we might kind of set a broad theme. And then what's nice is we can get some discussion going and people can start sharing what their goals and hopes and dreams are. That might trigger other people to realize, oh yeah, I want that too. Or, you know, I want it this other way. And then also we allow people, they don't have to, but if they're able to share what the negative voice is saying, and it helps other people realize, yeah, other people, they have those negative voices and doubts too, or here's the feeling. So, and then there's this kind of that intangible also, like you say, of this, there's a group energy, but it's very, very profound when there's all this clearing happening. And then at the end, especially, it's kind of exuberant because everyone goes into what we call the power pose, which is after they've released the negative voices, there's no more negative voice now. They have their positive voice of where they want to go. We have them smell oil and they get into a power pose, which is kind of like this. It's arms up, your chest out or arms just up. And that comes from the research from Harvard University, Amy Cuddy, where she found that standing for 2 minutes in a power pose, like I was showing you, will raise testosterone and lower cortisol. So it puts us in a confident but relaxed place, which is just where you want to be. That's kind of that zone. So we end the process and we're smelling an essential oil. Like I love the Young Living Transformation or Believe oil, and or even simple lemon oil works. And when you're smelling the oil, we're also pairing the oil with the feeling you have now, because the brain always works by association. So we're forming a strong association between the smell and that good feeling. So when everyone in the room is doing that, it's very exuberant to see people just feeling so good afterwards.
What you're describing for me personally is very exciting, because I have a firm belief that for many reasons, the synergy of individual work and group work is really where we're going, and for many reasons. And I'm very excited. Look forward to speaking with you off the air about how I might be able to become a more active part of that, because I think that at a community level right now is really viable, and it's really what's needed. And I think the technology exists to pull it off and to make it very cost effective for people, because that's an issue for many people these days. I mean, I could see, 500 people coming together online for a very nominal fee.
Yeah.
Very nominal, and still, you're able to support your family and do what you need to do. It's very exciting to me.
Well, let me just follow up on that for a minute, because there's kind of a natural progression that, again, I did not plan this, but it kind of happened when people started doing the AFT process. They started feeling so good. There's a natural impulse. Once we've discovered something, we want to share it with others. So people wanted to be able to go out into the world and teach this and see other people have the same type of experiences that they were seeing in the group I was teaching. So we have a level 2 program, the instructor certification, where we train people how to train others. And then they are really enjoying going out and doing these immersion classes, as well as creating, I have each of my students creating a specific class that is kind of their own synthesis of AFT where they want to take it. AFT doesn't change. AFT is what it is because it works. But like, for instance, I have one of my teachers is a midwife, and she has worked with so many women who have had difficult labor, difficult birth experiences, and it might stop, so then if they had difficulty with birth A, they're trying to have birth B, and there's all that emotional residue left over from birth A. So she does classes to helping people release the emotions connected with their birth experiences so they can have a positive experience. Or someone else does one on releasing spiritual blocks, things that happen in church that hold people back. So, people are taking this very thing we're talking about, getting a themed class, and then doing the clearings related to that theme.
Now, in terms of, one issue, of course, when you invent something and you innovate it and you bring it into the world, is on one hand, you want to maintain the integrity of the work, but on the other hand, you're giving it away to the world. So there's boundary issues involved. Like, for example, you've come up, and we can talk about how you came up with them, but you've come up with specific essential oils and essential oil blends to be used at different phases in the 12-step process you've developed. And I'm assuming that for the integrity of the work, you'd like people to stick with that. But on the other hand, you probably want people, once they reach a certain level, to be able to explore and experiment and come up with their own applications. And they might discover new oils or new blends that work even better or work in those situations. Have you thought about how, this kind of building on your last comments, have you thought about how you're going to maintain the basic integrity of the basic structure of the work while simultaneously supporting creativity?
Sure. Yeah, that came up, when I was finishing the book, the first edition of the book, and I had a decision to make about, well, which oils should I tell people to use? Because I had experimented with lots of different things, and there, a lot of things that were working, but I knew that if I just say, oh, use whatever oil you like, people either A, they wouldn't do it because they wouldn't feel like it was a specific enough instruction, or they'd go off and use some weird oil that would be toxic. So the decision, first of all, was to only use the Young Living oils because I know what they do, and I know, it's a predictable product. Just like a pharmaceutical company, when they're doing a study, they're going to say, you're going to use this specific pill because this is what we're testing. So, they're Young Living oils that we're using. And then I say, use them as I initially proposed. Frankincense, lavender, stress away. I have the research in the book that explains why those are good oils to use. It's a reliable result. For the second round, I'd love people to use Inner Child. Now, it doesn't mean that another oil might not work, but the Inner Child for so many people connects people with kind of that inner sense of who they are. And especially if the memory is connected with a sense of sadness or longing or loss of love, it seems very nurturing. The third round, I have people use Release oil, because the Release blend was designed to release especially things like anger, resentment, irritation. You know, Dr. Young created it to work right on the liver. And now, so I have kind of my recipe, knowing that sometimes it might come in reverse, and their anger might come first, and then their sadness might come after. I can't predict how it's going to happen, but I say, here's the palette of oils that I know from experience. If you use these oils, you're going to get where you need to go. But then I do tell people, you learn the technique as it is, and when we do the certification, you know, we have people do it as we teach it. And then once they've mastered it and they know they can do it that way, I say, you know, but we are infinite beings. And so, you know, if you're sitting there doing your process and the surrender oil comes into your mind, or the inspiration oil comes into your mind and it's sitting right there in front of you, yeah, grab that and smell that. And, you know, ultimately, we're just guiding people back to their own intuition. And a person might intuitively get a feeling like, I really need that cinnamon oil right now, because for whatever reason, I just feel drawn to it. So learn the technique first. Once you're familiar with the technique and you're doing it effectively, then you can improvise.
Okay. Well, let's talk about your relationship with Young Living. Young Living is a company that produces high quality essential oils. It's been around for several decades. It's a network marketing company. And what is your formal relationship with Young Living? And is Young Living interested in working with you to develop a low-cost kit for people that want to do Aroma-Freedom technique? I think it would be good to be completely transparent about your relationship with Young Living and the whole network marketing conversation, because it's going to come up, so we might as well just talk about it.
Tackle it head on. Thank you for asking that question, because people do sometimes, they make assumptions or they wonder what's going on. So right. So my wife and I, we enrolled with Young Living about almost 16 years ago. And for us, we weren't really looking for a business. It was just something we came across and we liked how they worked, so we used them. And then over the years, you know, different people would say, oh, well, what about this company or that company? Or for us, it wasn't really about that. You know, Young Living, our relationship with them, so we're distributors. We're platinum distributors, and so we have a downline. We have a group of people that we help with the business of Young Living and enrolling them and so on. And then back in 2006 was the first time, and then since then, many times, Young Living has hired me as a trainer to come to the convention, or they sent me to Japan and other places to teach to Young Living people about how to use the oils for emotional balance, or for brain health, or for different things that I've done. I'm not an employee of Young Living, though, so there's not a formal relationship beyond just being an independent distributor. But I have had conversations with them because I work with so many, especially since Aroma-Freedom technique came out. I'm working continuously with other people who are using Young Living who are not in my group. So I'm not getting specifically any compensation for the fact that they might get the Young Living oils. So the relationship is really based on loyalty and trust as well, because I've been to the farms and I've seen, you know, how they preserve the quality of it. And I've seen, you know, what some of the other companies, you know, may claim or not. There's a lot of debate out there about who's doing what. But I feel very confident that Young Living is the only oils that I'm recommending for this because of the quality. So another question it'll come up, so I'll just mention it here. People will say, well, have you ever signed up any of your clients, your psychology clients? I don't have an active psychology practice now, but for many years I did. And what would happen when I would be talking about oils, maybe do a process with them and they really liked it, I would encourage them to come to a class, and that was a different context. So I was getting them, I wasn't spending time in my therapy session signing them up or teaching them how to grow a Young Living business. I would say, well, we're doing a class next week. Why don't you come there? And then it's a different context. Then it's a group of people all learning together how to empower themselves. So that's how I handled that issue. And that's always worked really well for me. And I encourage people out there, if you're a practitioner, a psychotherapist or something like that, it's kind of a personal ethical decision in my view. If you are able to have discernment and, bring people in who can benefit from it, who can learn the information and use it themselves, then that's fine. But, in my view, I'm kind of no longer in that doctor-patient relationship with them once they're using the oils. So I don't know if that answered all your questions or not.
So just to recap and clarify, your fiduciary connection with Young Living so far, I hear, is there's two aspects of it. One is you get an income as a distributor based on the volume that moves through your group. And then you've also gotten paid from time to time as a speaker or presenter.
Yes.
In terms of the future about setting up a possible Aroma-Freedom technique kit with Young Living, would you be just wanting them to offer that, or would you be wanting some kind of a royalty arrangement there?
Right. Yeah. Thank you. So the third part, which hasn't happened yet, but I've had some discussions with them because so many people, they do the Aroma-Freedom technique, and I tell people that you can use it to introduce people to essential oils, where you would take them through an AFT process. They experience the benefit, they're excited, and then you could say, and here's your oils, and here's how you get started, and I can help you. So I've approached Young Living with this idea, and that if we had an AFT kit, I would envision it as being a kit that would include some instructions, so that it's kind of this standalone self-transformation technology that comes in a kit that has the oils and has probably not a DVD anymore, but just an online YouTube or something, and a little sheet explaining how to use it. At that point, if they were to move forward with that, then yeah, I would form some type of a partnership with them on that. The feedback I've gotten so far from people in Young Living is they're excited to see how it's developing, and they're kind of waiting to see how much interest there is, how many members are being trained and using it, so that if there's enough interest in a kit, then they would probably move forward. Great.
So I think that handles the in the back of people's minds. So I want to shift gears a little bit again. So there's been, I'm going to tell you things you already know. There's been a tremendous breakthrough over the last 20 years in brain science and neuroscience in terms of understanding, number one, understanding how memories are formed and how memories can actually be altered at the neurological level. And then there's also been a tremendous amount of breakthrough in understanding that the heart and the gut, the more we understand about them, that they really exhibit, from a cybernetic point of view, they exhibit a lot of properties of being a brain of their own. And that it's a validation of many spiritual traditions over thousands of years that have painted a picture for human beings of really being a synergy of head knowledge, heart knowledge, and gut knowledge. And it intuitively makes sense when you start to look at it, because it's pretty easy for people to see that sometimes they have a gut sense of something, sometimes they have a feeling in their heart, and sometimes they just have a knowing in their head. So it's existentially easily verifiable that this could be a very valid, useful model. And so because of the breakthroughs that have occurred in neurology, leading edge change agents, therapists, coaches, have, either because they know this or because they came to it on their own and then it was later validated by neuroscience, are now getting a very clear understanding of how to foster transformational shifts as opposed to a more Newtonian model of conditioning, because in that model, you're always going to get some form of blowback. And so most of the time, that blowback isn't handled. And so you end up with a person who is trying to make a lot of changes, but there's a quality of effortfulness and taking a lot of time and forcefulness. And so you get a lot of people who quit. You get a lot of people who reach a plateau. You get a lot of people that end up blaming themselves because it's not working. And now we're getting neuroscience validation for that there are certain conditions that need to be met in consciousness, where there's this window, this 5-hour window in the brain, where if these conditions are met, memory, not autobiographical memory, like not in the sense that you would have amnesia and forget that it happened, but emotional memory in terms of emotional trauma that would limit perception or would limit the ability to act, or that would limit one's ability to be at peace or to think clearly. There have been enormous breakthroughs in the last 20 years, so we understand what conditions are needed. And one of the things that I immediately thought of when I was exposed to your work, I felt compelled to share this information with you because I didn't know if you knew it. And I thought that if you knew it, it would, number one, validate your work, and number two, maybe catalyze your creativity even more for where you could go with it. So with that as a segue, I want to invite you, if you're willing, to talk about what your understanding is now of memory reconsolidation and how it relates to your work in the 12 steps and what impact it's had on you and what impact you foresee that it may have in the future development of your work.
Yes, thank you for that. And yeah, and I really appreciate you've brought a new dimension. You made me aware of some research that I was not aware of, and it did exactly that. It validated why what I had proposed, why it actually works. And by seeing why it works, gives us some ideas. So let me start first just by saying how I have always described what happens. And that is that when we are growing up, we're always developing a model of who we are. So every experience we have, we're going to develop a belief about myself, about the world, about life. That's the child's job, basically. It's a survival job to know I'm this and I'm not that. The world is safe. The world is dangerous, whatever it might be. So, and then what I say is that when we are going through and setting our goals, sometimes we have to modify those perceptions. And so we go back and the memory itself seems to kind of dissolve. Not that the memory is gone, but there's not an emotional charge to it. So what you're talking about is this process of memory reconsolidation. And it's Bruce Ecker's work and maybe some others as well who's synthesized this, but there's some animal work as well as some human studies that basically say that the purpose of a memory and an implicit memory, let's say a child was exposed to a harsh environment and learned that the world is unsafe because that was a survival learning.
I need to interrupt you for a minute. So when you use the word implicit memory, it's not that the child has the conscious thought, this world is unsafe, but the world does occur to them that way, even though they maybe can't language it that way, and they may not consciously know that they're concluding that. It's still a kind of learning, and that's what you're calling implicit learning. And that is a lot of what traditionally psychotherapists deal with, the realm of this implicit learning.
Right, that's right. These are the assumptions that we make about life without realizing that we're making these assumptions. So, right, it's not a conscious map. We'll call it a subconscious map of how the world is, because included in that memory is an expectation for how the world will be. So it's an implicit understanding that not only was the world unsafe when I was a child, but the world will be unsafe as I'm an adult going into it. And therefore, I better protect myself. Therefore, I better avoid relationships. So we develop our personality structure actually as a way, our personality basically is this structure built on these implicit beliefs about life, about who I am and who the world is. So we're going into our life with this set of assumptions, some of which serve us. Maybe if we learned that we're smart, that we're going to continue our education because we know we can do it. But if we learned that we're stupid, then we're going to not do any more education because we assume we can't. So all of these implicit assumptions about life are kind of, in a sense, that's our prison, the prison that we're living within. And what the brain science research has been finding is that if this implicit memory can be activated, and not just consciously, but actually felt, so you actually can feel what that feels like to be assuming the world is unsafe, just as an example. There's a window of time where the neurons are kind of in this, I don't know how else to say it, but kind of like this curious state, like, well, is that really true? Or maybe that's not how things are. Maybe things can be updated. And this is part of learning. You know, there's that saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. It's kind of like that. We, generally speaking, a lot of what we learn, it remains locked down, not to be changed. But there are some conditions, and the conditions are what they're learning. The conditions are identifying the structure of the thought process along with how it feels and how it feels in your body when you have that. So with my 12 steps, that's step 2, 3, and 4 is the thought, the feeling, and the feeling in the body. Totally not even knowing this research. This is what was so interesting when you sent me those articles, because I was creating those conditions for change by doing the thought, the feeling in the body, and then the memory, all those together. Now what I was doing and what I do is I then take the next piece, which is what's called the mismatch. When that learning is activated, if you can then somehow realize that that's actually not accurate to how the world is now, your brain will rewire and they'll say, okay, I guess that's not accurate now. I guess it was dangerous then, but it's safe now because now I can feel this experience of safety. And so I guess it's no longer accurate to say that the world is dangerous because there's times when I'm safe. And what I do is by smelling the essential oil, and it's triggering those smell receptors, which can trigger either an alarm response or a relaxation response. By triggering those feelings of calmness, it disconfirms that implicit understanding that the world is dangerous. And so that whole thing kind of breaks apart. And then there's an opportunity to reprogram. And what some of these other neuroscientists are doing and psychotherapists is they're saying, okay, so now you realize that the world isn't always like that, but sometimes can be this other way. So now you can put in more of a conscious understanding of how it is. The way I do that is once the negative voices are gone, the memory's dissolved, I say, okay, now let's set an affirmation that expresses how what you just learned, what you just realized. So it could be this realization that I am safe, or the world supports me, or I love people and people love me. Whatever it is that kind of comes in that moment, that becomes your new reality. Now, interestingly, when I wrote the book a little over a year ago, I said I want people to say for at least 3 days, up to a week or whatever it is, until it really feels anchored. And a couple months ago, I was at a lecture by Greg Braden, and he had on the screen a picture of a neuron that was reaching out for another neuron. And it was this time-lapse photography, and you could see it reaching out and trying to form new connections. And he said, the scientists have discovered it takes 3 days for a new neural pathway to become hardwired. And I thought, wow, well, so I had been telling people, this is my intuition that was telling me, tell them to do it for 3 days. And now the science is saying it takes 3 days to wire it. But another thing that I always tell people, a lot of people like to use affirmations. And affirmations, going back to Louise Hay and other people, a lot of people use them and they can be very helpful. An affirmation is basically a statement of how you would like to believe. The idea being that if you say it often enough, it's going to rewire your brain. And then people got more sophisticated. They said, well, you need to say it with feeling and with conviction. That's true as well. The more feeling and conviction you can say it with, the more likely it is to rewire. And my perspective on that is that affirmations are good, but if you haven't cleared out whatever the opposite of the affirmation is, the negative thoughts in your head that are telling you that's not true, there's going to be this fight happening in your brain. So you are affirming I am abundant, And then your back of your brain is saying, yeah, but you're in debt. And you say, no, I'm affirming that I'm abundant. And the back of your head is saying, you're not worth it. So it's this constant fight. What we do with the Aroma-Freedom is we clear away the negative voices, and we literally go until there is not a negative voice. When you say, I am abundant, your brain is just like, yeah, just like there's nothing arguing against that. So then you're in kind of a fertile ground then you can plant the seed of, here's my affirmation that I want to rewire in that direction.
That is so beautiful, and it's so elegant. And it matches my experience of, I think where people get in trouble with affirmations, it's like you're saying, when they use it in a forceful way, like a sledgehammer. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think it's much better to use it as a exploration of a possibility. And either you resonate with it or it brings up the opposite. And then you need a way of being and working with the opposite. You know, one way of doing it is like you're describing, so that it's less likely for any opposites to come up because you've already cleared it out. Or you need some technique to embrace this material that comes up, the opposite stuff. And there's different approaches for doing that as well. And so, and then of course, for people that are auditory, affirmations can be very powerful because they're speaking and they're hearing. Whereas, you know, maybe somebody who is more visual, maybe it works for them more to have a visual image or like that. But the principle of the affirmation not being part of the kind of consciousness, but more like, oh, what if this was possible? Like a probe, like trying this on for size, and then tracking your own experience in the body, in the belly, in the heart, in the head, and seeing if it resonates, or using it as a way to expose the resistance and then welcome the resistance and then have ways of working with that. I really think that meta model is the key to handling what people call resistance in an artful way. And the structure of your approach, where you start with a goal and then it brings up the resistance, and then you work with the resistance in this mindful, compassionate way, you're already embodying what I'm saying. And, you know, there's a profound wisdom and sophistication to your model that, you know, most lay people will not appreciate, but that's totally okay, because that's not the point.
Yeah, I'll also mention that there are two main states that an organism can be in. They can either be in a growth and learning state or a defense and withdrawal state. And that's true whether you go back to a single cell protozoa is going to be swimming around in the soup until it encounters, looking for food, we'll say, or warmth or whatever it likes, until it encounters something, a poison or a chemical or something, a virus, and then it retreats. So we're all of us, single cell organisms all the way up to us, are in that same boat. And look at a child. I use the analogy of a child that first learns to crawl, and the child is just crawling wherever they can, right? It's this drive we have for exploration of our environment and just to kind of see what life's about. And they go until they encounter something that pushes them back, whether they hit a wall, they can't go any further, they touch a hot stove and they recoil, something happens, or they get yelled at and they pull back. And so then there's this interplay between growth and learning or defense and withdrawal. So what happens is in life, we have all these experiences and we kind of reach the limit of what's going to cause pain. And then we pull back. So we kind of have this map of like, if I'm within this boundary, I'm safe. But if I go beyond this boundary, then there's danger. So then there's, so what we're doing is we're saying, okay, well, let's try. And this is where you had mentioned the heart wisdom. You know, I hadn't put it this way until you kind of cast what I was doing in a different light. And you said, well, we're really kind of starting from the heart. I mean, the subtitle of the book is about realizing your heart's desire. Like my heart's desire was to write a book. I had always known I wanted to write a book. Not everyone's desire, but that was mine. And so because I had that, then whatever the thoughts were in my head that said that's not possible, are holding me back from that. So we all have this this heart's desire, and that's really where we need to start, because if someone just makes up something out of the blue, oh, I want to make $1 million. Well, that may not be what they really want. They may really want a loving relationship, or they may really just want peace. So it's important that people start from this sense of what they want, and then we work with, like you said, we work with the resistance that we become aware of. I pull from a lot of different, that could be a whole other discussion, cataloging all the different psychological theories where each one of them fits in this. But I did study with someone who had studied with Eugene Gendlin, who developed focusing, and a lot of the somatic psychotherapy concepts would start with, for instance, visualizing a person and then, or saying something, and then scan your body and notice where you feel any tension or tightness. So if I say visualize your parents right now, and how do you feel in your body when you visualize them and you feel some pain in your heart, or you feel some knot in your gut, that's telling us that there's something within you that freezes up when you imagine that. And now, so we have a way, there's lots of methods, but so AFT, we would then, okay, so we would work with that to find out what is resisting, because that's that part of you that is not in growth and learning anymore, but is in that fear and withdrawal. So just one last piece on this. I know it's a long-winded answer, but so many people have issues related to learning because almost everyone has a bad school experience story they can tell. For some people, it's because maybe at that time they should have been labeled learning disabled and given help, and they weren't, and or they couldn't keep up with the class, or maybe they did great in class, but they felt awkward socially. They had some experience in their school years that caused them to pull back in some ways. So I always encourage people to ask questions related to, well, what was school like for you? And because a lot of people stop learning, and now technology is moving so quickly that a lot of people who did fine with a certain level of technology are feeling like, I can't learn one more thing. I can't master Facebook. I can't master YouTube. I can't, whatever it is. We work with stuff like that, and we say, okay, well, let's set a goal of being able to set up your Facebook account, or whatever it is. Clearing out and very often we'll go back to a childhood memory of some time when they couldn't learn something. Clear that out, put people back in a growth and learning process, and they're just like, okay, if I don't understand, I'll ask someone who does, and I'll figure it out. Like, the attitude shifts into one of no big deal.
It's great. So I'm feeling it's probably good to start to move this conversation to a close. But I would love to, if you're willing, I'd love to sometime soon have a second conversation with you, where
Sure.
we do a few things. One is we actually can use me as a guinea pig, and we can actually do a session so people find out how quick and easy it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, the more we're talking, the more excited I'm getting about a much broader conversation. And that would be the ontological and sociological implications and potential applications of your work. Because I think if you extend the foundations of where you're coming from, it has some pretty far-reaching and powerful implications for the possibility of human beings and for the possibility of human community and human society. And if you're willing to go there, I think that could be a really juicy conversation, especially in the context of people having a taste of the work.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, yeah, I'd be happy to do a session with you, right? So everyone can see how quick it works and how simple it is. And then I do think about that all the time. You know, what would it be like if everyone realized that the things that they want in life, they can actually, doesn't mean that it's a guarantee that everyone can get everything they want, but it means they can move towards it. They can take the steps in that direction instead of procrastinating, or instead of feeling, oh, that's out of reach for me. You know, what would happen if people in a frustrated relationship realize there's steps I can take to actually get this moving in the right direction? Or if they're feeling stuck in their career, there's actually a step I can take to release my energy so I can move it in the positive direction. So yeah, the implications are broad, and I'm just thrilled with the opportunity to share it with the world. And then also I do want the mental health field to learn about this and learn how to integrate, because no guarantees, but I've had people tell me that one session did more for them than 10 years of therapy. I'm not saying it's always the case, but people need tools, and I would love nothing more than to see the professionals working with people use whatever part of this makes sense in their context to just help people move quicker. And I think that, humanity, to speak idealistically for a minute, humanity can be moving into a new age beyond survival is really what we want. We want to get beyond survival to actually where people are actualizing their dreams and they're living at a higher potential.
I call that thrival.
Nice.
So I want to give you a chance to cover two more things. Number one is anything else you'd like to say in closing at all. And then number two, to please give out whatever contact information, websites, email addresses, phone number, anything you want to give out for people that are say, hey, this is really cool. I want to know more. One other thing I would like to have you address before we close it out, and that is that because of the current legal situation in the United States, unless we're in a private setting, we don't really have the freedom to speak freely about the power of essential oils. Have you thought about starting a private group where we can speak freely and maximize our understanding and use of the oils?
Sure. So a couple things is the best way to reach me. My website is www.aromafreedom.com. And that's where you can get my books. I have my book, my quick guide. I have some DVDs. And you can also register for certification classes. And then my other website is www.aromafreedomacademy.com. And that's where I have the certification classes I teach, as well as my students teach their variety of classes, all that use AFT as the core. So those two websites are the best way to reach me. Email address, just info@aromafreedom.com. Can reach me that way. Facebook, good to follow me at Benjamin Perkus. And I have a Facebook group, which is Aroma Freedom Academy Facebook group. Now that is a private group. So by definition, it's something that it's not public, but you can ask to be added. Once you're added, you can ask whatever question you like, and we can have the conversation go in whatever way it needs to go. Of course, when people are in the certification classes, it's also a private, experience to ask what you want. And I did start for mental health professionals, there's a Facebook group called AFT for Mental Health Professionals. And this is for the mental health professionals to have that conversation about how might we use it with particular diagnoses. Because just as a reminder, AFT is not a therapy in itself. It's not, diagnosing or prescribing or meant to be used for any specific mental diagnosis. But if you're a trained professional, you can integrate it in your work with clients. So I'll just put those things in there.
Great. Any last words, or are you feel complete, or?
I'm complete. I'm just glad to have the conversation. I want to thank you, David, for all the work you do to enlighten humanity. And just let me know. I'll be happy to work with you again. And anyone else who's listening, I hope you get great benefit from this. And please reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Perkus. Oh, you might want to spell your last name for people.
Oh, thank you. So it's Perkus, P-E-R-K-U-S, Perkus.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to another edition or watching another edition of Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul, where we do in-depth interviews with individuals that are doing cutting-edge work in the areas of healing, spirituality, and social transformation. Our special guest today has been Dr. Benjamin Perkus, and we've been talking about Aroma-Freedom technique, and I am going to call this episode Aroma-Freedom Technique Part 1, because I'm excited that we are going to have a Part 2 later. So with that, We'll close with love and peace. Bye for now.